Today on Technado, we'll be talking with James from SnapLogic about a data bill of rights. Also going to check in with Stan from D3 Security. We've also got a lot of Microsoft news to get to, and that's all coming up on Technado, starting right now. Hello and welcome to Technado. I'm your host, Peter Van Rysdam, and I am joined by Don Pizzette and Justin Dennison. How you doing, gentlemen?
I'm doing pretty good. I can't speak for Don now.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a slow week this week. We only have 2 interviews as opposed to last week we had 3. So we've got James Markarian with SnapLogic coming up, and he worked on a data bill of rights. We're going to take a look at and then talk a little bit about SnapLogic as well. And then we have Stan Engelbrecht from D3 Security, someone who we were just looking. We actually talked to D3 Security, not Stan, but that was back in 2016 at RSA, so we'll be able to catch up and see what's happened in the last several years. We also have a lot of news articles to get to, and to make it more fun, of course, we have our buzzword bingo again that we're ready to go for, and I hope you're playing along at home. If not, you can head over to go.itpro.tv/buzzword-bingo.
Yep.
Yeah, buzzword-bingo. Print out your own card. Pause right now. Go ahead and grab that. Fill out your little card and play along with us. Because the first article of the day, we're jumping right in over on ZDNet. Law enforcement seizes dark web, ding ding, market after moderator leaks back-end credentials. Wall Street market seized by law enforcement agencies from Germany, the U.S., the Netherlands, and France. So this is... we looked back at the dark web on one of your webinars, and it looks like basically they found a way to track one of these people and then could identify them.
You know, you would think that this would be as advanced and technical as that, but this is actually like the laziest server takeover ever. So what happened is, and if you had attended my dark web webinar, then you probably remember that there's a number of different dark web markets that are out there where you can sell whatever you want. And one of the more popular ones was called the Wall Street market. Well, the Wall Street market is the one that was seized here and taken down. And what happened is one of the administrators of the Wall Street market had started to blackmail and extort the sellers on the market. So basically he was collecting their personal information and then reaching out to them and saying, look, you need to pay me. It was a pretty small amount of Bitcoin. I think it was $300 or something. The equivalent of $300.
Yeah, I think it's $280 equivalent U.S. dollars.
So not a ton.
Yeah.
And basically saying, if you pay me this ransom, then fine. But if you don't, then I am going to leak out your information and people will know what a criminal you are. Well, I guess some people paid it. I don't know. But eventually, after a few weeks, the administrator got bored and said, you know what, forget this. Went to one of the forums that are available on the dark web and posted his credentials and just said, hey, would you like to log in as an admin to the Wall Street market? Here's the username and password. And so anybody could log in as this user and then have administrative access to the market. Who knows how many people actually did that, but at least one law enforcement person did, because then law enforcement took it over. So it's kind of like it was handed to them on a silver platter. They didn't really have to do anything crazy to defeat hidden privacy tunnels and all that mess. It just happened.
If you read further down in the article, they actually took over another one, Valhalla. I think it was a Finnish one, right? I'm guessing this administrator was probably involved in both of those.
Well, so once they had the Wall Street market, they were able to basically, they leave it up and operational for a little while to capture credentials, and then they rely on password reuse to be able to then jump and try and compromise other sites. And so Valhalla fell after that. Who knows how many others could have come and gone, ones we've never heard of. But again, this was really like an easy move for them because of that initial handoff of credentials.
But by having this information then and kind of having that data from the back end, then do they have an opportunity to get other people's information about who they are in real life, or is that stuff kind of hidden in here because we're using...
It always boils down to how careful people are. If you've come up with a completely false identity and you are paying with Bitcoin wallets that have been anonymized or sanitized, then you'd still be hidden, right? But plenty of people do dumb things like use their regular email address when they're buying their black tar heroin or whatever on the dark web. And so, or you're using a Bitcoin wallet that you've cashed into your bank account at some point or run through an exchange that's tied to your personal. So once they start to collect that data, then a lot of times they can figure out who you are. The criminals don't normally care, but the authorities will do that.
Yeah, and it's not just Bitcoin. There's other. What's the word?
Trying to get me to say.
I didn't write Bitcoin. I wrote the broader one because I was thinking.
Which is what?
I can't remember. No, it's written right here. Though. You can
any of the blockchain-based cryptocurrencies will do it.
Oh, that's a give me done. That's
Circle gets the square. All right. Fantastic. Well, now
and just to kind of finish up, I think that was part of how the individuals started blackmailing is people were not using unencrypted like communications to this Wall Street market, and he was like, "Ooh, let me start just extorting these people."
Yeah.
I would be hard pressed. It just seems odd that he would get bored and go, just take it over, whatever.
Well, I'm not surprised, to hear that a criminal did criminal things. It all kind of falls together. So there's a certain degree of trust you have to have when you're selling your heroin online. And
no honor among thieves. That's too bad. All right, let's head over to Bleeping Computer, sticking with the security theme here. Attackers wiping GitHub and GitLab repos, and they leave ransom notes. So, and they updated the article here, added official statements from GitHub, GitLab, and Bitbucket at the end of the article. But the leaving ransom notes part, that's pretty bold and a great way to get caught.
Well, a lot of developers rely on these repositories to store their work, and many of them know that it's being backed up in some kind of way or there's file versioning, and so they don't worry about their own backups. This is the single kind of trusted repository for their data, which is usually a bad idea. But to have it wiped out like this and have it wiped out in a way that you can't recover is pretty significant, right? That's a lot of people's livelihood right there. Dropping a ransom note, we've seen ransomware that runs on individual machines that encrypts a hard drive, holds the data hostage, and you got to pay some Bitcoin in order to get your data back. This model is just kind of being applied on these repos. And it's interesting because unlike ransomware that might hit single moms or the elderly or people that don't have the money to pay, most developers are making a pretty good salary, so I bet they can get a good return on this.
Well, a question for you, Justin, on this is kind of you're the dev guy. You've used these repos before. You trust them to be backing up the data for you. I mean, is it best practice to keep a local copy of things like this? Obviously, you're not going to have the most up to date.
So it's funny. I got really intrigued by this article because I was like, wipe it out. How are you going to wipe it out? Because the entire impetus behind Git, the Git toolset was distributed, non-connected, like working together with multiple versions. So there's a couple of things. I dug a little further trying to find like how these were resolved, because this actually affected GitHub, GitLab, and Bitbucket, not just those two main players. But it looks like all they did was make a commit that made it look like their stuff was gone. So people are like, just move the head of your repo back, and boom, all your stuff's there. So there's a couple of things there. If, let's say, Don and I and you were working on a repository and you're the one that had the ransomware, which apparently was scanning for...
That's most accurate, probably.
Yeah. I like to stay true to form. It was scanning for these .git folders is how Git works, and it was just making a commit there and doing what's called a force push. So you would be the one pushing if you had, push rights. But then if Don and I, either one of us hadn't pushed or hadn't pulled or anything, we just do a force push to change it back.
Because you have the most recent one that you'd pulled down.
Yeah. Now, in addition to that, you can actually just look at the history and go, oh, well, there it is. So it looks like if you go to Stack Exchange, they're like, just reset your head to the previous commit. There's ways to look at your Git history. And it seems that this person was, there's some kind of other ransomware interfacing with Git. And interestingly enough, this is probably more or less seasoned developers who are maybe not as familiar. They're like, oh no, our stuff's gone. This is bad. Yeah. On the flip side, one of the bad things is if they gained access to that and they were private repos, they could possibly change permissions or republish things that are not supposed to be public. And if you're also using it to store sensitive information, which you should not, that could also be bad.
Yeah, Atlassian came out with a statement on this, and they said in their case that it wasn't a hack. Somebody didn't compromise the system through a normal means. They had valid user credentials. So they think that there was a user credential database somewhere that was compromised, or people were doing password reuse. And so they were just logging in with valid credentials to people's repos. And if you didn't have multi-factor authentication turned on, then you could just get in and do things like delete what was in there. And they actually posted the ransom note, which I was just pulling up here. It's got a Bitcoin address that you can send your payment to. And, they actually do have an email. You can email them at admin@gitsbackup.com if you need support, which
that's nice.
That address may be able to be traced back to somebody, or that might be part of another compromised domain. But it looks like they were asking for about $568, which again, it's not an exorbitant amount of money for a developer who's lost their project, or a company that's lost their project. They could get that back. So these types of attacks are pretty successful, and it just shows you've got to secure your accounts. Multi-factor authentication is becoming more and more important.
Real quick, did he say that word?
I didn't mark it down. I didn't ever hear that. He did at the beginning, because he said,
it's not. You said that word, right?
Yes.
We're looking at
bingo.
I
bingo.
Wait, bingo already?
Bingo, yo.
Hold on, please go down your list.
Bitcoin, dark web, free space, cryptocurrency hacking.
Did he say cryptocurrency?
He
because
did.
I know
He did
I
say
tried to get you to.
cryptocurrency, yep.
Oh, right, because then I didn't get to circle that. Shoot. All right, well,
Man.
Don and I are playing
Shortest.
for second place here.
Yeah, runners up.
Has this word been said? I circled
Yes.
that, but okay, I thought so. All right. So we got, for keeping track at home, we've got,
All right.
I'm close.
But just be aware how your tools work. Two-factor auth is important. And also, like on my version control stuff, I always have it turned on that if it's logged in from computers that it's never logged in from, I immediately get text messages and emails, like they spam me. They're like, "This is bad."
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like how you assume that I would be the one that would be hacked, but I am not that. I watched the Git, or I did the Git shows.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
You
You were with
hosted
me.
it.
Yeah, you were there.
Speaking of which, unrelated, did you get those $500 iTunes gift cards that you asked for?
Oh, yeah.
I sent them
yeah,
over.
yeah.
Okay. Wanted to make sure you got those.
That phishing scam has been ramping up lately.
It really has. I saw something on our sysadmin on Reddit today about a guy who said the CEO got a call from someone in line at CVS going, "So you need 5, but they're all different cards?" You get They're like, "What are you doing?"
Okay.
All right, let's head. Or actually, we're staying on Bleeping Computer, but a new article here. Evil Clippy makes malicious office docs that dodge detection. Wasn't the original Clippy evil?
Yeah. Okay. You stole.
Is that what you're gonna do?
Yeah. I was like, you mean Clippy?
Yeah,
The
regular
regular
Clippy,
Clippy,
yeah.
right? It looks like you're writing a letter, and I need to enable macros.
You're a monster. So, but this one is actually about macros too, right? This makes it easier to get through.
So basically, there's a security company called Outflank, and what they did is they made a program called Evil Clippy, and it allows you to create Office documents for Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and so on that have one of a number of different vulnerabilities or exploits in them that are able to evade a lot of antivirus and anti-malware. They do some macro stuff, a lot of VBA, compiled VBA exploits are in there, and several other known. So you can actually pick and choose between different exploits to nest inside of it. It's designed to be a tool for pen testers to use, but you can also use it to test how well your endpoint security is working. If you're running one malware program over another one, you can kind of generate these files and test it and so on. Now, these type of tools, they sound bad. Like, well, they're enabling not just pen testers, but also enabling threat actors, right? Yeah. But at the same time, once these tools get released, all the various antivirus vendors pick up on it.
It's like a vaccine. We're releasing a little bit of malicious stuff out there, and
I feel like you're just trying to poke the bear.
I know.
I feel like you're
I'm serious.
But it is an inoculation, right? Yeah. We're gonna make you aware of these issues. And honestly, I didn't know about some of these exploits, like VBA stomping, where they're like, this is a legitimate macro, and then they pull the old switcheroo and put malicious code, but it's like a compiled version, and they're like, yeah, it looks fine, and then bad things happen. So yeah, you know what? Are we going to keep macros in these programs?
I never use macros in Office documents, but I guess somebody does because they've been a big feature for a long time, even though they've been a huge security vulnerability. I don't know. It's a thing.
What I found interesting about this is Evil Clippy calls out to a web server and then like reports the Office version and Windows version in the headers of the request so that it's automatically patched for that particular Windows version because it was version dependent. And I was like, that is slick. But they show all these like HTTP requests coming back from the...
It was 90% Windows 7, right?
Yeah.
Well, they show...
XP.
Internet Explorer 6. That's weird.
I wouldn't trust a security tool that has to phone home like that. That does live patching. That's a risk in and of itself.
Yeah,
it is. All right, sticking with the Microsoft theme over on GeekWire.com, Microsoft may be all in on cloud computing, but Azure reliability is lagging the competition. And I thought that was the whole point of this stuff, that we didn't have to worry about its reliability.
So Microsoft has been in the news quite a bit this last week. Most of it good, right? Their build conference is going on, all sorts of new stuff coming out. We're going to see some of that later on in the podcast. But they did have one big black eye, which was earlier in the week. They had an Azure outage. And you'd think with all the various data centers that they have and all the redundancy and infrastructure that they wouldn't have a giant outage like what they had. But in this case, it was a DNS problem. The way they synchronized DNS caused some records to become corrupt. And if you can't look up an IP address to connect, it doesn't matter how many IP addresses the system has, you're not going to be able to get there. So they had an outage. Now, Microsoft is not the only cloud provider to have outages. They all do. But according to GeekWire, they ranked the three major players, which are AWS, Google Cloud Platform, GCP, there we go, and the Microsoft Azure. And of the three, Azure has the worst record so far. Now, that record, in the case of AWS, is a 99.9987% uptime, which is almost 5 nines.
I was going to say, you want
right?
5 nines.
You're really, really close.
It's 4 nines.
With Google Cloud, I always want to say Google Compute, which is wrong. So Google Cloud, 99.9982, so also close, but not as close as Amazon. And then Azure in last place at 99.9792. So they are they're at 3 nines, which is not great.
Those are Rackspace numbers.
And they're not even right next to 4 nines.
Yeah.
So that's a rough spot to be in. And I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you work it out, I mean, that's like an extra hour of downtime, I think. I haven't done the actual math. I'm making that up.
It's something like that. It is a non-trivial amount of time, especially if you have like business requirements that require uptime. Now, for me, for small little projects, you're probably not going to know the difference between these. But if you have large workloads that are always running, or if you had like an e-commerce site and it was getting ready to, this happened at Black Friday, then that 1 hour could make a substantial difference, both in revenue, also your perception. But the comparisons are always fun because I look at that, and because I don't have those problems, I go, it's close enough.
Yeah. Well, the big deal here is that it was DNS that caused the problem, right? So you can say like, I'm going to go multi-cloud. Right, I'm going to put some of my resources in AWS, some of them in Azure, and that way if one of them goes down, I'm still up, right? But your DNS records have to go somewhere. You got to choose a registrar, and the registrar can then point to more than one DNS server, right? So you could have your registrar point to a DNS server over in Azure and a DNS server over in AWS and kind of distribute a bit that way. But your registrar becomes that single point of failure. So there's a bit of a struggle there. Now, in this case, having multiple DNS servers wouldn't have solved the problem because Microsoft's DNS servers were up. They just had bad records, so they would have returned bad data back, and you wouldn't have necessarily failed over to the secondaries. So it was a rough situation for them, and it's a hard one to solve even with multi-cloud.
And am I wrong? Isn't that what caused the S3 outage out about like a year and a half ago? It was like a weird corruption or a mispush of DNS records or something, or am I wrong about that?
So it depends on which outage you're talking about. And going back to the fact that they've all had them, because last year Amazon had a BGP routing issue
that might have been
that derailed things.
Yeah.
That was the bigger one. But then they did have another one where there were some DNS issues as well. So their hierarchy was messed up.
That's why I keep my DNS in the new Russian internet.
Oh, yeah. It'll stay up even after the rest of the world is isolated.
Yeah. Shoot. It'd be nice if you repeated the things I said back to me. All right. Let's head over now to Slashdot. And still with the Microsoft. Microsoft is building Internet Explorer into its new Chromium Edge, adding new features. So does this mean we will no longer have Internet Explorer separate from Edge?
That's what it looks like. In Windows 10, you have two completely separate browsers, Edge and Internet Explorer 11. And anytime you run Internet Explorer 11, it all whines at you and tells you, hey, you should try Edge. So they announced they were doing the new version of Edge that has the Chromium engine behind it, and now they're saying there's going to be an Internet Explorer mode in it. So when you view a web page, you can actually flip it to IE11 mode. Now, they haven't come clean with a lot of details on this. They say that it's a separate rendering engine and it's built into the back, but they said that it is dependent on the operating system supporting IE11, which makes me think that you still do have IE11 in the background, and it's just saving you the time of launching an extra window. That would be my theory.
So as someone who was like, I'm going to try to rip Internet Explorer out of a Windows computer, Internet Explorer is tightly meshed with File Explorer. I don't know if it still is, but at one point, yeah, that was a good way to hose your Windows installation, because I was like, yeah.
It's in the kernel, right?
Yeah, I deleted it, and then my File Explorer didn't work anymore. So there's like shared components there. So I got a funny feeling you're probably right, because otherwise, that means that part of the operating system has to change, right? And that's either a rewrite or they're going to lean, like, is Microsoft Windows becoming Chromium OS? I doubt it, but you never know.
It could, I suppose. But as far back as like Windows 95, Windows 98, one of their big launch features back then was the active desktop, where your desktop was actually being rendered by Internet Explorer 4. And that was a big deal. People thought that was an amazing feature. And then I think they realized how bad an idea it was and phased that out later on. But it's hooked in a lot of places. So we'll see what happens there. This ties into the next article, and I'm going to steal... Oh, not the next article, darn it. We skipped an article. That's what happened. All right. Well, anyhow,
I did.
They have announced that there's going to be Microsoft Edge for Mac OS, and so they're releasing a Mac version of the Edge browser, and it will not have IE11 mode, which again makes me think that IE11 is still on your system. So on Mac OS, you will have the Chromium-based Edge browser, just minus IE11.
All right, is that the Tom's Hardware? Is that where we're going next?
I don't know. We got all sorts out of order now, because the Tom's Hardware was Windows is giving the command line a makeover, which, Satya Nadella made some news a couple of years ago, and he took over and said, hey, we're going to update the command prompt to do silly, crazy things you should have been able to do for a long time, like hit Control-C and Control-V to copy and paste. Well, this time it is a full-on terminal makeover. And Justin, you've actually had a chance to work with this, right?
Yeah, actually, Adam and I sat down this morning, and we got it working. It is an early alpha release, at least this portion of it is. So it took some doing. But now we can run Windows subsystems in individual tabs, as well as PowerShell Core, PowerShell, and Command Prompt. You can switch between them. You do get Unicode support. It was a better terminal experience for me based on being on Mac computers or in Linux systems. It's something I was more familiar with, and it is customizable. They're kind of moving toward like JSON configuration, like they do with Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio. Mm-hmm. So all your configuration at this current time is just JSON. You just change it around. I know eventually they're hoping to make that very automated. You just install it from the Windows Store. But it was pretty slick. I will say, at current time, it takes a little bit of work to get it up and going.
Yeah, they'll bake it into Windows in a few updates down the line. Probably if you're on the fast ring, you'll start seeing it soon. It did introduce some flashy bells and whistles, like you have transparent background support now, emojis, right? I mean,
yeah, I stopped reading at that. I'm sold.
Gotta have emojis in the terminal, which you now have. So this is all very, very similar. If you're a Linux user, you are used to all of these features that we're talking about. So it's Windows kind of reaching that same parity level. But just a tabbed terminal window built into Windows is kind of a nice thing to have.
All right, so I think this next article may be the thing that Don has been dreaming of for his whole life.
Well, we're getting closer.
We are.
Yeah, I mean, it's like planting the seed. It's like finding out that you're having a baby. It's not the delivery yet, but
a lot of things can go wrong.
There's a lot of things that can go wrong.
I guess that's a matter of perspective, because it might be fear and
sure, which it could be as well. So what are we talking about? Well, over at howtogeek.com, Windows 10 is getting a built-in Linux kernel.
Yes.
So is this did they branch off their own?
Yes, they did.
Oh
so this is really interesting, because they're doing something I didn't think they were going to do. I thought, I still feel like we're going to see a Microsoft Linux one day, right? Because over 50% of virtual machines being launched in Microsoft Azure are Linux machines. It makes sense for Microsoft to have their own version of Linux. They released the Windows subsystem for Linux last year. I use it practically every day, and it did something kind of tricky, which is it does not run a Linux kernel. when you run the Windows subsystem for Linux, they're taking all of the calls from the utilities inside of your particular distro, and they're translating them and running them against the Windows kernel. So it looks like Linux, but it's actually Windows under the hood. Well, now they've announced Windows Subsystem for Linux 2, or WSL2. And with WSL2, you have a real, actual Linux kernel fully maintained by Microsoft. And so it runs on top of the Windows platform. It's not emulated. They have handled all the procedure calls that the kernel itself makes. So it is still calling the Windows kernel under the hood, but it's running at native speeds. And so it's able to perform very, very quickly. It is based on Linux kernel, I believe, 4.19,
yes,
if I recall correctly, which is coincidentally what Red Hat is basing some of their newer stuff off of. So we're getting some kind of consistency there. But it also means that we can now do things like run Docker containers, right? You could not run Docker containers under WSL, the original one, because there was no actual Linux kernel, which is a requirement for Docker, but you will now be able to do that under WSL2. So really exciting stuff. The real interesting thing here is that security updates and so on will actually be coming from Windows Update. So Windows Update is now Windows and Linux Update, which is a big change.
Well, that's odd. So this Linux one, didn't they have an IoT one, like a small one built for ARM systems? So it was Azure Sphere, where they had this small little IoT Linux. Is that the same one here, or is this a totally offshoot?
I looked really hard and I could find nothing. And I can't imagine it's the same, because with that one, it was designed to run on actual hardware. This one is designed to run on top of the kernel API. So I would suspect they're two different things. But, again, if Microsoft had their own Linux, then it would make this a lot easier.
I'm just excited that like file system operations, actually Git, NPM, things that I use that were always that's a headache if you're on a Windows system, and if you were trying to teach anybody on a Windows system. This is now an order of magnitude fast, 20 times faster, getting close to what you would experience if you were on Mac or Linux systems. So I'm pretty interested to see when this comes out. I might give it a go. It might allow me to bridge those worlds.
I know a lot of developers like to develop on a Mac because you can open up a terminal and it's a BSD Unix terminal. So you can do all sorts of crazy stuff back there that you'll do on your servers. You get the same kind of environment. Well, this brings Windows closer to that you'll now be able to kind of do the same thing. And I think that'll make a lot of developers, especially, revisit whether they want to stay on that Mac, especially with the crappy hardware Apple's putting out lately.
All right, and for those of you that are playing along at home on Buzzword Bingo, Don did say containers in that, and that has Justin one square away from a second Buzzword Bingo before Don or I get one. So disgusting. All right, let's go over to Phoronix now. Spectre Meltdown, which I haven't heard a lot about recently. Spectre Meltdown mitigations can now be toggled with convenient mitigations equals option. Did I always say that? All right.
Yep.
So what does that mean? Because you lost me there.
Yeah, so last year when all the Spectre and Meltdown mitigations came out, there were a number of sites, Phoronix included, where they ran reports on how much those mitigations hurt performance, right? They basically disable the ability for you to do hyperthreading and make it where multi-core is a lot more sensitive, and it slows your system down. Now, if you are a cloud service provider, that's important. You need to keep your customers separate. You need to insulate for this. But if you're a home user or running servers in your own private environment and you're single tenant, you don't really care. And so now you're taking a performance hit for no real benefit. And so there have been ways to disable the Spectre and Meltdown mitigations, but they've been really hard. And then they get overwritten the next time you do an update and so on. But starting with the Linux kernel 5.2, they're introducing a kernel option. So you can go into your grub bootloader and set your boot string up to contain that option, mitigations equals, and then designate whether or not you want to load or disable those options. If you disable them, your system will boot now with full hyperthreading capability and not have to slow itself down to protect from those memory leaks. So it's a convenient way to solve something that really, according to Linus Torvalds, shouldn't have been forced on us in the first place. Now it's easy to toggle on and off. And Linus, he's pushing to have this disabled by default, to turn off the mitigations. And if you work in one of those environments where it matters, you can choose to turn them on. So I haven't seen whether or not they've opted to make that official yet. That is yet to come.
Have you gone in your grub bootloader yet?
Yeah. So I haven't used my Linux computer in a while. I probably need to update. So no, I have not turned these on.
In there.
Most of the distros are not running 5.2 yet.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you got some time.
Also, these type of performance thing, it's not really my workload. It probably doesn't impact me a great deal anyway.
Yeah, I didn't have Grub bootloader on my Technado card here. I was not expecting that one today. All right, we're going to stay in Phoronix now, continuing in the Linux world. Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.0 reaches general availability. So general availability means that we're out of beta and it's full release.
That's right.
Okay.
One of the big things about Red Hat is they are the largest commercially supported version of Linux. And that means if you install it and you have a problem, you can actually call them and get support, but it also means you have to pay more for it. Well, companies go to Red Hat because they want stability, and that means you don't want to run a beta or a pre-release or whatever in production. Well, now Red Hat 8.0 is fully released. And the feature list doesn't sound all that amazing, but there are some pretty interesting changes in here that you'll want to pay attention to. If you were running Red Hat 7 or RHEL 7, its kernel was actually running Linux kernel 3.10. We were just talking about 5.2. 3.10 is pretty old. That doesn't mean that it was really out of date, though, because Red Hat was doing a bunch of backporting. They would take new features and patch it into their... So their 3.10 kernel is a lot different than other people's 3.10 kernel, but it was getting frustrating because a lot of software was being updated, and it would say that kernel was out of date or was missing a feature it needed, especially if you were dealing with any kind of container platform. They all were having issues running on top of RHEL. Well, with Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.0, they are updating to the Linux kernel 4.18. I think I said 4.19 a minute ago, but it's 4.18, which gets them a lot more in line with the container and virtualization software that's out there. So that will certainly be a nice thing. They're also doing some stuff that I think is a little risky. For example, if you do the GUI install, they're defaulting to the Wayland compositor. Fedora did that a while back, and I don't think Wayland is ready for mainstream. That's my opinion. Canonical agrees with me. Ubuntu still defaults to X Windows and not Wayland. We'll have to see where that goes, but just be aware if you're a Red Hat shop and you're rolling out a GUI, be careful for that change in compositor. That can break certain things.
All right, sounds good. Well, our next article over here on Slashdot, WordPress finally gets the security features a third of the internet deserves. Are we really up to a third of the internet using WordPress now?
Over 30% of websites are built using WordPress.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a huge portion of the market.
Yeah. And so what are these security features that we can now enjoy from that third of the internet?
There's a handful of things here, and these are things that they really should have had for a long time. One of them is digitally signed update packages, right? Somebody can compromise a repository and put a compromised version of a WordPress update in, and when you apply the update, now you've been broken into and you did it yourself by doing your updates, which should be a good thing. So they are rolling out support for that. The big one, in my opinion, is that their encryption library that they use on the back end is mcrypt, which is no longer supported. So they are switching over to libsodium, which is a newer, more widely supported encryption library. So a couple of updates like that. There's a few other authentication things they're updating and some crash reporting and so on, which are nice features to have. But the real big deal here, the digitally signed updates and the encryption library.
So if I am a WordPress developer or running a WordPress site, is there something I need to do, or is this just out in the newest
Maybe.
release?
For most people, no. But with WordPress, the risk is always the plugins, right? So depending on what plugins you're running, if you have plugins that depend on mcrypt, right, if they're doing their own kind of encryption, like we used to have a chat room plugin that did that years ago, and it would try to do encryption, and so it was tied to mcrypt. If it's not updated to support libsodium, that can cause a problem. If it's flowing all the calls through WordPress, then it would be all right. But if it's doing anything direct, that can be a problem. So always test before rolling out.
And it looks like they're anticipating a little bit of that because there's a compatibility library to maybe translate those calls between those two encryption libraries. The really scary thing is compromised update server, not digitally signed, not checking things out. Boom, third of the internet, all kinds of bad. So hopefully that will be mitigated a little bit.
All right. Our last article before we get to our interviews here over at TechCrunch. A glitch is breaking all Firefox extensions. And that's...
and that's a bad thing.
That's not good. Yeah.
So this actually happened to me over the weekend because I have some lab machines that we're going to be using in a hacking webinar next week. Or not next week, like coming up. So, yeah, very, very soon.
Or in the past,
so
for those of you listening.
It should already be done by the time you're hearing this podcast. But so I had a version of Firefox in there, and I had it locked in so that I knew how everything would work. And all of a sudden, the plugin stopped working. And what happened is Firefox has a plugin validation system where they can determine whether a plugin has been tampered with. It was reliant upon a certificate that was assigned in the background to be able to do the checks, and they let the certificate expire. Once it expired, it didn't matter whether your extensions were legitimate or not. It red flagged all of them, and they all shut down, and Firefox, the Mozilla team had to scramble to get an update pushed out for that. If you haven't updated, your plugins are likely still broken. Mine still are, and I won't update them until after the webinar.
That seems like a big whoops. Like, I knew we were forgetting something. Now, some of you may be saying, well, I don't use Firefox. Well, then this doesn't affect you.
Well, this did extend a little further, though. The real big snafu was the Tor browser, right? So Tor is built, or the Tor browser at least, is built upon Firefox, and it has several plugins that are built in and enabled by default. One of them is the no script plugin. So, you don't want to run scripts when you go to a dark web website. And, well, that plugin was rejected. And so if you didn't notice, if you ignored the warning message, you were then browsing these nefarious websites, and scripts may be running that you would have previously been blocking. So this had far-reaching effects. A lot of people leveraged Firefox, maybe not the direct client application, but the libraries and stuff on the back end, and they were all affected. So this was a big deal.
All right. Well, I don't use Firefox, so I'm fine. Well, if the Google plugins, all go down, then I've got issues. But we've got an interview to get to, actually. We've got James Markarian, who's the CTO over at SnapLogic out in San Francisco. He's going to be joining us in a second. And he actually, we're going to talk to him about SnapLogic, but he also put together basically a data bill of rights that was published over on thehill.com. And it's a pretty interesting read, and
so we're going to get a chance to learn about what that entails and what his thoughts are, and and kind of see what direction that's all moving in.
All right, well, let's go ahead and bring him in. We're going to do that right after this here on Technado.
My name is Dana Morrison. I'm the IT director at Grace Christian School in Raleigh, North Carolina. IT directors often hoard so much knowledge that it's hard for their team members to learn. IT Pro TV has given us the ability to level up our technicians to a point where they can decide, this is important for me to learn. I would recommend IT Pro TV to any IT team. It's just a great tool for any IT professional.
Welcome back to Technado, and as promised, now we are joined all the way from the Bay Area in California by James Markarian, who's the CTO and also the CSO at SnapLogic. James, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for joining us. So, those that aren't familiar with SnapLogic, let's just start there. What does SnapLogic do? Something about privacy, from what I understand.
Well, we sort of dovetail into privacy, and we're a leading provider of application and data integration. So if you're connecting all of your applications together for operational purposes, or you're dumping all of your data into Snowflake or Redshift for analytic purposes, that's what SnapLogic does. And as such, we really touch data in all its kind of shapes and sizes. And sometimes people are really concerned about the privacy of that information flowing around, which is kind of what got me thinking about our topic for today.
Yeah, and that topic is, of course, kind of a data bill of rights that you put together. It's published on thehill.com, titled "Making the Data Economy Work for Companies and People." So kind of talk through what was the impetus for putting that together. Is that something you've been thinking about for a while and decided to put down on paper there?
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about for a while, and I've thought about since, and I've maybe evolved my thinking a little bit since the writing of that original article. So first, where I was coming from was, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's like this kind of current political maelstrom about election manipulation and everything, and it made me really kind of think about how much do we really know about where our information goes once it leaves our fingertips, and what, if anything, should we think about that? So, we've heard a lot about, sort of various manipulation from like Russian troll farms, or like closer to home, like through advertisers and other things influencing, what we see. And a lot of times that's predicated on information that we somewhat willingly give up about ourselves. And the question is, do we really know, what we're giving up and how it's being used, other than like the cookie, reminder that we quickly click through on websites. And so that was kind of the beginning of it.
All right, and we know that while we might trust the company that we're sharing our data with, that companies aren't always reliable in maintaining the integrity of that data. So we have Facebook reselling the information to other people, companies that are being breached and accidentally leaking the data out. So that data is getting lost. And so you put together at least the framework for a data bill of rights. And when we think of the Bill of Rights here in the United States, our Bill of Rights are 10 constitutional amendments that dictate things that every citizen should have, or every human being at least should have, in order to have a good quality of life. So on the data side, what does that look like? Like what are the rights that we should have for our data?
Yeah, so this is where my thinking has evolved a little bit. So I think it is a good question: what rights should we have? And I think we would ask a meta question almost before that, which is kind of should we even have rights to our data? Is that a reasonable thing to say? And I guess from my thinking, I thought I should at least have more knowledge than what I currently do about how that data is being used, and maybe some more control over it than I currently do. And then if we kind of agree on that, which we may or may not do, then we start asking the question, well, what would those rights actually look like? And kind of, I think that there's some hand-wavy arguments here, but nonetheless, I think that there needs to be an economic dimension to the discussion as well. And so I think first and foremost, what I'd want is some degree of transparency, so that I can tell where my information goes, transparency in that way, but then also some transparency into how the information I'm being presented kind of got to me. Meaning, like, if there's metadata around it, like this came from a suspected troll farm, this came from a think tank of some sort of political bias, this came from my buying history on the site. At least if I want to, I would like the ability to get a little bit more transparency into that data. So that would be kind of maybe, I don't know if this is a prioritized list, I'm sorry, but like that might be at least one of the 10 that I would add in there, kind of a right to transparency.
I hadn't thought about it, but our actual Bill of Rights is prioritized, in that order. So you'd really have to think about how you organize that. But, it's interesting you mentioned about the transparency, because there was a presentation that I saw a few weeks ago where a gentleman was highlighting how Google tracks your search behavior and the topics that you're interested in, and they customize your search results based on your history. So, for example, if you take any hot button issue like vaccinations, right? So if I've been to a lot of websites that are pro-vaccination, and I search for the word vaccination, I'll get results that are positive. And if you are an anti-vaccination person, then you would get results based on that. But it doesn't actually tell you those search results are customized. It just does it. And so we don't necessarily see how they're using that data.
Well, this is a very interesting point. First of all, let me just distinguish. The articles of the Constitution are prioritized. The Bill of Rights is more of like a sentiment, sort of like the Declaration of Independence, right? So yes, like the articles of the Constitution, like free press or freedom of religion and right to bear arms, et cetera, that is theoretically prioritized. Bill of Rights, I think we have a little more discretion in that it's more like of a philosophy about things. So in terms of the search order, since we kind of brought that up, there's this like interesting like dichotomy. So we care about convenience a lot. You would actually sort of argue that a lot of the internet, or at least the web, is kind of predicated on the fact that convenience trumps almost everything, if you'll pardon the expression. So like I like efficient search results because it conforms to like maybe my my biases or my priorities or something. Similarly, like, if I search in Amazon or anything, like I get search results that are highly, they attempt to make it as efficient for me as possible. And I can feel the effect of that efficiency. Like I know what's time efficient instinctively. The question is what I don't really have complete transparency over is this sort of manipulation factor, and it's not intended to be so conspiracy theory sounding, but like I know the effects of efficiency immediately, but I don't necessarily know like what other effect, like is this information going to be used to sway elections? Am I being presented with information in such a way to have a manipulative effect? And it's a very hard thing to gauge. Like we don't have an innate sense for whether I'm getting manipulated. In fact, because we do have cognitive biases, actually, generally we're being manipulated along those lines. And so it just feels kind of natural. It's like, yeah, this is exactly what I think. And like we're all kind of programmed to be efficient in that way. That's its own form of efficiency. So it's a really, kind of interesting thing where there's this like dichotomy on the two sides.
That's an odd thing because actually a few of us have talked out in the office. That actually agitates me very badly when I cannot see an opposing viewpoint or possible differences between what I feel or what I think, and it just agitates me. But that kind of brings in maybe an overarching question. This might be more philosophical than anything. If this was imposed, right, I know transparency, I know where this comes from, do you think that has a more resounding impact on maybe our society at large, or what does that look like? Or is that the impetus? Is that part of the reason here, or what?
Yeah, it's a good and very hard question to answer. So I think first of all, this is maybe a corollary to the transparency issue, which is, ideally, at least for some people, we'd like a dial. So I can say, okay, I want something that conforms heavily to my views. Maybe I want something that is completely opposed to my views. Maybe I want something that's more balanced. And can I effectively achieve that in a reasonable way now? So you'd want that ability. And since you are being served according to your biases, you feel like instinctively there is the ability, like whether it's in your Facebook feed or whether it's in your Google search results, to kind of give you that level of ability. Most people would not want it. So there's very few of us that probably would want that. Second of all, there's a question about like how influential that would be. And I think, here's where I'll like fall back on the old academic standby. I don't know. I think that I want that ability. I'd like to see what effect it actually has. And I at least kind of want that control, because then I can maybe do something with it, or at least argue that, various, folks on either side aren't seeing an unbiased view. It's hard to just assess in some way what the effect of that would be.
Fortunately, a lot more people have their eyes on that problem now, because I know like YouTube has been under some scrutiny because they say that based on tailored search results, it tends to force people towards extremism. It continues moving you further and further in the direction of your beliefs, and it creates an echo chamber. So that's kind of being learned about right now. But one thing that can be measured is the efficiency. You mentioned you can feel when something is more efficient for you, and that is a bit of a reward, right? You're able to work more efficiently or get access to your information more quickly. And it makes me think about another thing you mentioned in your article, which is these companies that we share our data with, they're turning around and using that data to make money, right? To generate revenue. And you had mentioned that we should be able to share in that profit, that if they're benefiting financially, we should benefit financially. But I know a number of these companies make the argument that same efficiency you just mentioned, that's the payment, that's the coin. By giving you Google with Gmail, right? By giving you free email, that's us paying you, right, and then you give me data. So where do you stand on that? Like, how does that affect? Is that good enough? Are we being compensated?
Yeah, so I think this was part of like the naivety that maybe I showed then, and let me just sort of like temper it a little bit. So first of all, like I probably conflated a lot of things on the original writing. So there's the privacy issue, this transparency issue. There's maybe trust. There's ownership. There's a lot of things that are conflated in all of this. Let me just say first of all. Second of all, on this economic thing, so I'll make the most like aggregate form of argument I can, which is you look at kind of the raw profitability of say Google, that at least in the Valley, is sort of viewed as like essentially a printing press for money. So I serve up ads. I do paid search rank, or paid ads within the within search, et cetera. And basically they print money, and they're like wildly profitable and can afford to do lots of things like autonomous vehicles, et cetera. So yes, there is a fee for that service. There's no doubt about it. They have to pay the bills. Now, at what point does paying the bills stop and sort of like gross profitability start? And so there's a reasonable question about sort of like how much of private 747s, like should we be paying for, like in order to like give up our privacy? The other part of it is like, again, back to transparency, we just don't know. Yes, I know that I'm being served ads and being made more efficient. I don't really know where my data is going. I don't know how it's being used. At least let me see that, and then I can make an informed decision. Like maybe I opt out, like who knows? And then maybe the profits go down. But if I don't really know, I can't make an informed decision.
I think a big challenge here is just how do you put a price on that personal data, because it's such an evolving field. It changes monthly, really, the way that your personal data is able to be used, that the value, it probably fluctuates like the stock market in a way. Do
I get to set the value?
And maybe there is a market price for that. Sorry, please.
No, you're fine. I was just saying, do I get to set the price of because my data is very valuable. That's all I'm saying. If I'm going to give up my right to privacy, then.
Wasn't there a guy that did that? He took like an export of his Facebook, all the Facebook data they stored on him, and he put it on eBay to kind of let people bid for it to find out what that value was, and eBay canceled the auction.
But I think that that's good novel thinking about it, and we don't really know what the right way is. And I think let me invert things a little bit and say, right now there's this belief that you don't have the right to participate in these services if you don't give up your data. And so it is a little bit pay to play, only we don't know exactly what we're paying in order to play. And we're also, not really given a choice. And you can look at things like, Facebook and Google and Twitter and say, look, these are private companies. You don't have to use them. But the effectiveness of these companies is based on this network effect of everybody using it. Search gets better. Facebook becomes more valuable because of the network effect, as does Twitter. What if we inverted things and say these companies can't use your data unless they compensate you, or they can't use your data at all, meaning that they need to just everything needs to be anonymized. They can't use any information, any cookie information about you. And they have the right to not be in business if they can only be in business to use your data. So we're kind of putting the onus on the consumer to make the decision about whether to participate in what's essentially kind of at a certain scale, like a public good. Like, Google is essentially, touches billions of people. It's essentially a public good. Facebook touches like, hundreds of millions of people. It's essentially a public good. And at some point, you cross that line between like a small private company and something that's essentially public. And, do you have a right to say at that point that people cannot participate in effectively public utilities? It's the price of success, I guess.
Now, we've been referencing the Bill of Rights, which is a U.S. document, but this is obviously an international, a global issue, right? People all over the planet. So let's say that we could solve some of the philosophical issues here and come up with the perfect listing of here's exactly what we need to have, and we answer all those questions. Where does this get implemented at? Is this a UN type thing, or just a gentleman's agreement between all the various companies?
Maritime law.
Maritime. Yeah, we haven't even considered like outer space, which might bring in maritime law. That's right. So it's an excellent question, and I'm hardly a big government guy. But if you look at GDPR and the enforcement in Europe about privacy and the fines related to like incidents of breaching privacy, I think in the end there's necessarily some sort of like government intervention here, and there should probably be an authority for doling out that information, which how it gets controlled. Maybe some sort of brokerage for the market for that economy. Like I don't think eBay is necessarily like the right way to do it. And how would you pay for something like that? It should be paid by the participants. So again, let's start with the premise that these companies have to pay for the right to that data. Therefore, they pay for the privilege of being essentially regulated in their use by this data. And I've mentioned in my article the potential for the use of blockchain in this, and there's some discussion about how that would work. But essentially, if a company can't prove that it has legitimate access to your data by having sort of the blockchain permission to use that information, they could be substantially fined or shut down, meaning shut out of the internet, by having too many breaches of that data. And I think we just have to be super brutal about it, and just say like, no, if you have that data incorrectly, for GDPR, there's something like a $5,000 fine per incident. And if you magnify that number by millions and lots of incidents, pretty soon you get into like tens, hundreds, and even billions of millions or billions of dollars of fines. So this would be very significant.
Now, I know Don wants to talk more about the blockchain stuff, and we'll definitely get to that. But I wanted to ask, since you brought up GDPR, with your experience in this field, where do you think that they've succeeded? Are there things that you think with GDPR that maybe they didn't go far enough? Did they go too far? What's your take on how that's kind of all played out as we've seen, first the lead up to it, and now, it's been rolled out for some time?
First, let me make an admission. Like, other than being able to spell GDPR and knowing like the basics of it, I'm probably not the world's foremost authority. I'll give you kind of like my anecdotal information, which is so like as an example, SnapLogic provides a service. We need to be GDPR compliant to protect what we would consider PII and certainly PCI information that's like stored on in our servers. And every software vendor is extremely concerned about running in the right regions, having the right protection over that PII, so that we don't get fines and our customers can actually use our software. And so basically, by having this regulation, they made the consumers of software extremely concerned about all of their vendors and about how they themselves protect that information. And what I'd look for is like a similar kind of downstream effect of regulation in this country.
Well, I can share with you a little bit of like my favorite part of GDPR. That if you ever do get around to reading it, it's not entertaining, but there's over 90 points in it, and one of the points says that if your company is under a certain size, if you have less than 250 employees, then you don't necessarily have to be GDPR compliant. So while it does make some big strides in protecting consumer identity and MPII, it's still like as long as you just have 200 employees, then you can do whatever you want.
Make everyone a contractor.
You could massively game the system and like break up Google into companies that are no bigger than 250 employees.
Yeah, so there are certain weaknesses.
But then, the hope would be, so in Europe, vendors would say, if you're not GDPR compliant, I don't care how big you are, we can't use you. because they're under a certain restriction. But then they would make an informed decision about like whether they want to work with you or not. So I think, again, I don't think it actually takes a lot to make this system sort of snap into place. Although, what we've seen recently, my kind of broadest observation is I think a lot of what we do, like a lot of our government mechanisms, since we brought up like the Bill of Rights, it kind of relies on the fact that we kind of trust, people to kind of act basically as like good actors and things generally like break down apparently massively when they don't. And probably like you guys, since you read GDPR, maybe you read the following, but I remember just recently I read the Federalist Papers about like what were the framers of the Constitution really thinking at the time that it was put together. And there's a lot of information in there about the assumptions that they made in putting together the Constitution, and about how the Electoral College will function, and how like a president of a certain character will act, and how like society, which was a fraction of the size it is now, will behave in these circumstances. And all the assumptions are pretty much different and out the window now. So now I've sort of snapped back and said, okay, we shouldn't rely on people and companies acting in a certain way. So let's have enough of a framework that we can kind of get the outcome that we want. Sorry for that diatribe.
Oh, no problem. And if you're just tuning in, we are talking with James Markarian, CTO of SnapLogic, and about his recently published article on a data bill of rights. And, James, one of the things that you alluded to in the article, or you just briefly mentioned, was how we maintain custody of our data once it's already been shared out, so that we can potentially remove that custody, take it back and make it ours again. Right now, if I choose to share my data with Facebook, it's now shared, and it's very, very difficult to get that unshared and to retain it. And they're even able to turn around and share it with other people. So we've really lost control. And you had made a mention that potentially technologies like blockchain could step in and kind of serve to help that. I was curious, have you seen any technologies or companies that are working in that space to try and make it where that data can be pulled back?
Not at all. So this is sort of aspirational. And the basic idea is, think of like blockchain in its broadest sense as kind of like a permissioning scheme where I, grant control, and you could say like prove that you were granted access to my information. Then presumably any other user of that information would have the ability to prove that they were granted access to that information. And back to my earlier comments, if they couldn't prove that they were granted access to that information by the proper owner, which in this case would be me, not Facebook, because they wouldn't necessarily be delegated kind of grantor rights to that data. That's where the fining ability, or the ability to shut down under egregious like cases, accessors of that information could actually occur. Yes.
How does this impact like inconsequential? I mean, I kind of look back. I see a couple of people behind him, right? Does this count as data that they would have access to? Say, I want to revoke access from like pictures of me or images from me. Would that be considered in this, or am I just totally off base here?
Well, since this is all like sort of a blue sky discussion, I think that you would ask the Socratic question: what do you think it should include? So, I think that there's. So when you look at the current manipulation that's happening now, this has to do more with behavioral information, so that like my biases are being manipulated. It's unclear, and it's also computationally very difficult for that to happen in the case of like image processing. Now, as that gets like more efficient, and as scarier and scarier things happen in terms of like plugging people into pictures and videos and everything, I think that it is an interesting topic in and of itself. But I'm thinking more about sort of like, clickstream and textual information, at least the way I originally conceived of it.
Yeah, and Justin should be fine. I don't think anyone's looking for his photo.
I could say the same about you.
Well, I didn't bring up the concern. So.
Yeah, let's all agree that it probably applies to all of us.
Well, I was thinking like the ramification. It just made me think of this, but if you're out on a picnic or you're hanging out with your family, and incidentally, there's other individuals behind the scenes. You post these somewhere, or these are in a family. Like, does this have consequences there? But as you said, this is a blue sky discussion. But there's definitely some gotchas. I'm also a little bit of a devil's advocate.
Well,
also.
I'm sure a state-run facial identity program would be able to pick those up in the background and fix that. So we can solve that pretty easy at the government.
You could scan the QR codes on our foreheads by then.
Well, it brings up a good point. I mean, I think these problems only get worse in the future. And I think that my main, kind of thesis here is if we don't really start thinking about it now and taking it seriously, people are already arguing like the horse has left the, barn or whatever the expression is. And it's only going to get harder to kind of reel this back in. So I think now is kind of when we need a good, almost like public policy discussion on, how we should really think about this as a society.
That's right. So I did want to ask you one more question before we let you go. I come from the marketing background, and I was put off at the first sentence of this article. Advertisers and even more nefarious actors. You held that for a very long time. Yeah. Advertisers and even more nefarious actors have been using our data against us for years. Now, I'll give you an opportunity to clarify there that not all are using it nefariously, correct?
Yeah, correct. And again, there's this interesting thing, which is in a lot of cases, the efficiency that advertisers in particular bring to us because of our data is absolutely welcomed. Like, people love that fact. There's like the expression now, like, give me convenience or give me death. And basically, if something's not convenient, it almost doesn't exist. So people get a lot of benefit from it. And it's not just being manipulated; it's actually being used to our advantage. So that's not nefarious. I think that one of the things that's sort of different now is somehow the scale of all of this, like the fact that you can kind of harvest information and process it so easily. Like, everything used to be sort of quaint, like. There was like a quaint political process where yes, maybe in the town hall meeting and reading my local paper, I would hear a certain viewpoint. But now that there's everything is happening at what I would call this public scale, something in my mind, and it might not be fair, kind of tipped over and said, okay, this is a really powerful tool now. Let's just think about it and be careful. And even if we think about it and we say, it's working as well as it's ever going to work, that that's okay. But it seems like it's just sort of happened more than we've thought about it.
That makes sense. And I know that was just a clickbait first line to get people to read, but as one of the good ones, just want to say that we're out there. We exist.
Marketers have feelings.
Yeah,
too.
we do. You wouldn't know.
Who knew?
All right, James. Before we let you go, people can definitely head over to thehill.com and read the article there. Again, the headline for you searching was "Making the Data Economy Work for Companies and People." But if people want to find out more about SnapLogic, where can they head to find out?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is, first of all, you can Google, not to be too self-serving here, but Google SnapLogic. And you can certainly head to our URL, www.snaplogic.com.
That's assuming Google hasn't tailored your search results to block out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully in the future maybe we can reach out again when we have some more topics to talk about and get your take on those.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the time today, guys.
All right. Thanks, James, for joining us, and thank you all for watching. But stay tuned. We've got more Technado coming up right after this.
I'm James Packer. I'm the General Manager of Kirk ISS based in the Cayman Islands. I used IT Pro TV extensively in my last place. It grew very well, helped upskill the team. I had 110 engineers in the field and we had dozens of IT Pro accounts with the guys training, and last year alone they passed over 40 certs by using the online training. I think I can safely say without IT Pro TV I wouldn't be where I was today, because I only got this job on the back of the qualifications I have.
Welcome back to Technado, and we are now joined by an old friend of the show, actually someone we spoke to back at RSA in 2018. We have Stan Engelbrecht, the Director of Cybersecurity Practice at D3 Security, joining us from north of the border in the Vancouver area. How you doing, Stan?
Yeah, it's great to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have
you.
Looking
forward to chatting with you guys. Yeah.
So for those that maybe didn't see that interview from RSA last year, 2018, why don't you bring us up to speed on D3 Security and the products you guys offer?
Yeah, sure. So D3 Security is a SOAR platform. For those of you who may not be familiar with the SOAR space, it's an acronym that Gartner came up with, Security Orchestration Automated Response, and essentially in the incident response and case management area. So we cover the full life cycle of incidences that a SOC may be dealing with from their different alerting tools. So we tend to centralize those into our platform and then provide them the ability to pivot out from there, as well as automate a lot of the processes and threat intelligence gathering, as well as doing actions out into other security technologies.
All right. So what's been happening since we last spoke? Anything new with D3?
Since last we spoke, I think probably one of the bigger things that's going on is we're currently implementing the MITRE attack framework directly into the platform itself. This is what we're hoping to do is actually make SOCs more efficient. That's probably one of the bigger things that we've been working on.
Now, I know there's actually been a lot of movement in that space. A lot of companies kind of forwarding different areas, and at least what I've been seeing is that most of them focus in a very particular area. Like we did an interview with a company called Gravwell a few months back where they focused on you can aggregate all your data into this one big lump place and we will search through it faster than anybody else. And I think they deliver on that. It searches super fast, but they don't provide any threat intelligence on top of that. So, you get one piece of the puzzle. And then other vendors focus more on, hey, we'll aggregate the threat feeds. But you guys try and operate in that space where you're kind of that full picture. So you're gathering the data and you're making intelligent decisions on that and presenting that back. Factoring in the MITRE framework, you're able to basically match up that traffic activity with a known alert and give people actionable information based on that?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. So I mean, the MITRE attack framework, for those that are maybe not familiar with it, it's based off of tactics and techniques that known actors or known threat actors have been taking. So when we ingest an alert into the platform itself, we can then use what's been ingested and correlate that with items in the MITRE attack framework, as well as then supply maybe additional queries based on the technology that you have integrated into the system to go and search for other indicators and match those up with tactics and techniques to hopefully give you a jump on what may be happening in your environment.
And what types of data do you guys ingest? Can you ingest anything, or do you just kind of support particular logging formats?
Yeah, no, so the backend of D3 actually will support pretty much anything. So we'll go from like a SIM product to email. We can ingest from threat intelligence feeds, and actually most of the integrations are bidirectional. So if there's items that have to be written back to other systems, we can take care of that through our API function. The most common formats that we've seen are items like JSON or XML formats or like that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be data like that. It can be unstructured that we can bring in, and then basically the best way to do it is try to present it to the analysts in a way that's going to be easily digestible for them.
Now, if we're transmitting that data over to you guys and you're processing it, you're giving us feedback, you're creating those dashboards, do we still need a SIEM, or are we able to replace that with yours?
That's a great question. So we're very careful not to go into the SIEM space. So we will take what the SIEM gives us, because that's what the SIEM is there for. I mean, they're essentially, a lot of them are log aggregators, and they should be doing a lot of correlation for you. And if you've got your SIEM tuned correctly, you should be able to go and get some really nice actionable data out of there. What we end up supplying is that we'll bring that in and we can correlate that with other tools. So for example, you may not have all the threat intelligence directly connected into your SIEM. Some do, some don't. But we can then reach out to other third parties if there's feeds, or if they've actually got a threat intelligence platform. We can go and break out all those indicators that maybe that particular rule has given you, and actually correlate that with other feeds, and then give that all in a nice area for the analyst to have in front of them, so they don't have to run around to a whole bunch of different tools.
And another thing that I've been hearing a lot about, a couple of years ago, we saw this huge uptick in the amount of solutions that were out there that kind of provided a log aggregation and intelligence. So there are just a ton of providers, and everybody was really happy about it. Like, all right, finally I've got some way to take charge of this flood of data that we deal with on a daily basis, and we end up ignoring. Now people are starting to say, wait a minute, that logging data is super sensitive, and there's a lot of information about our customers' behavior, our users' behavior, and we need to keep that in-house. So when leveraging your solution, are we able to keep all that data in-house, or is the analysis actually feeding back to you guys? What does that look like?
That's a great question. So the platform itself, we've got 2 deployments. So we do have a hosted solution that we can do. So if they want a cloud-based solution, they can do that. Each client has full control over their data, so we don't own the data. They can at any time pull out whatever they want to. We don't look at the data or anything else. It's all housed currently within Azure Cloud, but it's not limited to that. Or they can have a full on-premise installation. So if they have it on-premise, then they own everything. So we don't actually technically take their data in-house into our area. We will correlate it within the tool and wherever the data resides. Whether it's cloud-based solution or whether it's on-prem, the client's got full control. So we don't like dealing with the client data. Let's put it that way. The less eyes that are on it, the better. And because you said it rightly, because it's an incident response platform that can be used for insider threats or other things, there's oftentimes a lot of PII and other sensitive data items in there. So the less that we don't want to handle it, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah, just not wanting to touch it. That's kind of the best solution with some of this stuff.
Yeah, don't show it to me. I don't want to see it.
Now,
no, don't want to see it.
Let's say that one of our listeners is hearing about this, and they say, all right, well, I would love to have a dashboard where I could see collated is not the right word, but correlated, there we go, that's the word, correlated information. So I see an attack taking place or unusual activity on numerous nodes. They want to implement it, right? But if somebody doesn't have an infrastructure in place for all of the security reporting, if they don't have centralized logging, if they don't have a SIM, if they don't have those pieces, maybe they just have firewall, switches, routers. What all would they need? What are the pieces of the puzzle we'd have to put together to create that solution?
That's a great question. So if they don't, say they don't have a centralized system for aggregation, maybe they're watching a bunch of different items like that. You could centralize it in our particular platform because we can ingest from pretty much anything. If so long as the security team, this is maybe a caveat that I tend to give on the SOAR side of the items. SOAR will only really function well if the security team has full control of the technologies. So in other words, you're not having to go to an intermediary team. In other words, I'm the SOC, I have control of the firewalls, I've got control over the network items, and I can go and get data back and forth. Now, we still have ways of handling that because we can integrate with ticketing systems and you can send up the change requests and the other items to different teams, but it's still seamless, but you're still waiting on other teams. If the SOC's got full control, you can take those disparate systems and integrate them. So in other words, if you're monitoring or you're looking at different items that come in, maybe you've got an alert coming off your firewall, we can adjust that. And then you can do prescribed actions or actions straight out of the system. Like most SOAR products, you're looking at Python libraries generally. So they'll have a Python library that'll provide a wrapper for API calls. And that's generally where those integrations will come in. So it's usually a bidirectional. They don't have to have a centralized tool. It helps because you really want something to do that correlation for you prior to you having to jump around to a bunch of different tools. But it can be done with the platform.
All right, now I mentioned the volumes of data that people deal with, and what you're doing is effectively sifting through that data, and it can be insanely massive depending on the size of the company. I know you probably can't share information on your client base or individual customers, but what would you say is the largest data set that you guys or that one of your customers has worked with?
Are you talking more of an internal data set, or are you talking about something they're pulling in external? Maybe give me a bit of of what you're looking for in that particular question.
I guess if we think about it, there's a number of different places we could be gathering this data from, right? So there's our publicly exposed resources like a web server or email server, right? So that might be a massive amount of traffic just coming from the public. There's our internal nodes where, insider attacks are a very real thing. So, that can be a huge volume of data. I guess in my mind, I was thinking if we're going to aggregate all this together, then does it make sense to keep all those things separate? Will we have more than one implementation or would we aggregate it into one?
No, you could aggregate it into one. It would be a single point of ingestion. And I guess maybe to your point, I think the largest set of data that I've seen being ingested at once into the system would come to the SIM system, where they have a lot of alerts that are automatically ingested. So I should maybe have talked about that a little bit. When you're ingesting alerts into the tool, it doesn't necessarily have to be automatic. In other words, you can use an analyst who's looking at a SIM system going, okay, this one I think we need to push forward because it looks like it's something that we need to investigate, and then manually push it in. Other ones you can simply have set to come in an automated basis. I think the largest amount of data I think I've seen flowing into the system was probably about 5,000 alerts per minute, which is doable in the system. But again, there's ways that we can filter it at that point. So once it gets ingested, if we correlate it with other threat intelligence, we can go and supply priority rankings for that. So you're not just going from a whole mass of alerts on one side to, all of a sudden now I've got my SOAR tool and I've got a massive amounts of incidences that I now have to have, my 4 or 5 or 10 analysts try to filter through 5,000 a minute or something like that, right? The idea is to pull in a large set and then correlate that with other tools that they have so that you get some type of a priority ranking of items coming in, so that if you've got a whole bunch of lows or nothings, according to all your threat intelligence, you don't want your analysts functioning on those. You want the analysts functioning on, I've got this alert that's come from the SIM, and according to what I've got through my threat intelligence, I've got like indicators that are like known malicious. Those ones are ranked high priority and should be dealt with first. I hope does that answer the question, or is that
it does? And what I'm thinking about is like even our historical data. So if with SOAR, if we're most concerned about the actual threats, the things that we need to be reporting on, that people are taking action on, and we track that through the life cycle of mitigating it. If somebody wants to look at history, you would have that in terms of attacks, at least. You would have known attack activity, but just like routine traffic, that history wouldn't be maintained there. We would rely on our other systems for that.
Yeah, and you probably wouldn't even ingest something like that into the system, because if it's routine traffic, there's no point in anybody looking at it, right? You're counting on some of those other tool sets to essentially filter that out already, because they do that really, really well. So we're not gonna worry about that. We want to concern ourselves with the items that are actually coming into the tool that may or may not be necessarily malicious, but at least have something in them that goes, okay, this is something we have to look at. Maybe a good example of that. So we have one client, obviously won't go into specifics, but they do a lot of their phishing monitoring by an email inbox. And they have a lot of emails forwarded to them by what you call like their general populace of their employee base saying, I think this is a suspicious email. And that gets forwarded to an employee into a security inbox. We monitor that inbox and ingest every single one of those emails that get forwarded into that inbox. Now, that doesn't mean that every single one of those is a genuine phishing attack, but what we can do is we can parse out that information so the analyst isn't just sitting there looking at an email that somebody's forwarded going, okay, what do I have to look at here? We can parse that out. We can pull out all the individual pieces of metadata, any links, any attachments, have those correlated off to other tools, whether it's a sandboxing tool for a link analysis or attachment analysis, and have that all come back automatically into the tool itself, so that when the analyst gets to it and opens it, they've got everything there, and they can quickly look at their indicators from the tool sets and go, oh, this one's benign. I can just simply click a button, fire a notification off to the employee saying, thank you very much, but that one's benign. Or go, yeah, you know what, according to our sandbox analysis, this link is known malicious. Let's now go out into the system and see who else got this email and delete it off the mail server.
Now, you mentioned automation earlier. So are there other activities that we could just automate where it jumps in and takes care of that for us, or does it all end kind of with reporting to the SOC operator?
That's a great question. So the items that we've talked about more and more with our clients, there's low-hanging fruit for automation, such as the threat intelligence side of it. You should be able to go and gather that information automatic because you're pulling out those indicators anyways, right? You shouldn't have to have an analyst cut and paste and go from one tool to the other for that. We had one client call us up and go, you know what, if you could save me the 35 hours a week, my analysts cut and paste in different tools, I'm in. And that's not uncommon. Where the automation becomes trickier is when you're starting to go into blocking scripts and items like that. So in other words, do you always necessarily want to block a domain, or do you always want to block an IP address? That becomes trickier because if you block the wrong domain name or you block the wrong IP address, I at RSA there was a really good poster by a DLP company that said, yes, I blocked the CEO, said no one ever, and that's part of the automation side of it. So really understanding your processes helps when it comes to automating, because there's going to be items that are low-hanging fruit that's going to save a ton of time and give you an ROI really quickly. Other items, you know what, you may have to work at it for a couple months to go, is this really a process we want to automate? Yep, we've seen this over and over again. This one's safe to do. So I would say there's levels of automation, and it does come into implementation side on how you look at it from your company.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned like blocking the CEO. The one that I see the most often is Amazon S3 buckets. That if somebody is moving malware or other files through an S3 bucket and we block based on a domain, they're all under that Amazon top-level domain, and you lose the whole thing. So yeah, that's the double-edged sword of automation.
So, like I said, we always say, really look at your processes. Look what's wasting your analyst's time the most, and automate those particular processes because they tend to be the easy ones to automate. Blocking stuff where you start blocking things and changing rule sets and policies, it has to be done. We really push our clients saying, look, make sure you've got eyes on it first. You don't want to automate a bad process. You get bad automation if you automate a bad process.
All right, now I know this particular space is starting to get busier and busier. There's more competitors in the market. 2019 is really a big year for security products like yours. So I'm gonna ask a super general question here. What is it about your solution that you're the most excited about, that you feel is what sets you guys apart from the competition?
So a couple things. One is our configurability. So you're not locked into a process. So in other words, and what I mean by that is there's different frameworks out there. So say a company is running off a NIST framework. Okay. The entire playbook section can be configured to based off NIST. If there's clients running off a Verus framework, we could run off Verus. If they're running off of Lockheed Martin Cyber Kill Chain, we can have that configured in the system. So the flexibility to be able to do that is a big deal. Secondly is while we allow full Python scripting for people that are of that nature, that really want to have complete control over their integrations, over the calls, over putting their own scripts, we give that ability, but it's not a requirement. So out of the box, right now there's like 200 plus vendor integrations with I think 400 some odd actions that are predefined that you actually don't need any Python knowledge to use. It's a very simple point and click environment that allows you to set those up. And that's something that we're really proud on. And I think probably a third differentiator is our logging and tracking capability. So we think a playbook should be end to end, a full life cycle. So from the point of ingestion to the point of remediation, you should be able to track and log all the processes in between, what your analyst did, what worked, what didn't work, and to be able to build reports out on that. So those are some of the things that we're really excited about within our platform.
Yeah, and I was noticing on securityweek.com you wrote an article that does a really good job of kind of breaking down MITRE attacks and all that, the different phases and things. So definitely helpful for people that are just hearing about that and want to learn more. But if you want to learn more about D3 Security, what's the best way to do that?
www.d3security.com. You can find us on Twitter at D3 Security as well. Probably the two best places to go. It'll have the information there for you. There's like pretty much everywhere. There's got easy to fill out forms, and people will definitely get back to you. So it's probably the best place to learn.
And if you want to talk in person, I think you said you're going to be at Black Hat, was it?
I'll be at Black Hat this year. So you can reach out to me there. And again, I've got a personal Twitter handle. People can find it both on my LinkedIn profile and at Stan_Engel. But yeah, love to touch base with people. It's an exciting space, and as they said, 2018 was already a big push for it, and it seems like it's only getting bigger. So which is cool.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Stan, for catching up with us and letting us know what's happened since we last spoke. And I guess at this pace, we'll talk in about a year or so.
Yeah, hopefully sooner than that. It'd be great to see you guys down at Black Hat or some of the other places. Yeah. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and if we get a chance to talk again, that'd be awesome.
Definitely. Thanks so much for joining us today and taking the time. And thank you to all of you for watching. But stay tuned. We've got more coming up on Technado right after this. All right, welcome back to Technado, and thanks to Stan, but thanks to Don for carrying us in that interview, because Justin and I were going, do what? What are we talking about here?
Man, them's a lot of acronyms.
Well, it's funny because security solutions like theirs, we wouldn't need them if it weren't for people like you. So,
the simple folks.
It was funny because the whole time I'm going, I don't have any questions. This is why we need things like this, because I don't know what he's talking about. So I'm a horrible developer. I should probably figure out. But to some extent, I've never had to do any type of monitoring. Or that's usually not within my purview, but I did feel insignificant and dumb.
Well, while I was not understanding the words he said, I was paying attention to them so that I could get bingo. He gave me actionable. He gave us automation. I think that might have been all that he gave us.
He mentioned threat assessment.
He said threat assessment, but we have... you might be trapping me here.
Yeah.
He said threat feed is what we have.
Oh, threat feed? Did I?
Yeah, you can get it now. It's still not going to give you bingo. Don has every square possible.
You know what I
was
surprised that he didn't talk about? Cryptocurrency.
Oh, see now I just got pity bingo.
Don got pity bingo.
Yeah, that's the worst kind of bingo.
Well, we hope you at home got bingo as well. And if you didn't, then make sure you head over next time to itpro.tv/buzzword-bingo. Get your card and play along with us. It is fun, and it makes the times when you don't understand what's happening.
You're just looking at your card going, there's a word. There it is.
Yeah, say VR. Come on. Next time we will get a VR company that uses AI to manage their
learning
blockchain.
And quantum computers.
They're heading towards their IPO.
Yeah.
Oh, ROI. That was the other term.
It's definitely 5G technology.
5G,
yeah.
And Edward Snowden will be on their board.
The whole spectrum. Yeah, all the way from Russia. All right. Well, that's going to do it for that game there. But I do want to let you know about a couple of other things. We just had the hacking webinar. What does hacking look like? And that's going to be available probably sometime this week on our archives. You can still check that out if you didn't get a chance to attend with Don talking about, or Daniel hacking Don's machine. But our next webinar live coming up will be ITIL 4 Foundation Test Prep with Joe Peacock. That's Thursday, May 23rd. So head over to itpro.tv/webinars. You can sign up for that. You can sign up for the archived versions of all of the past webinars that you're going to want to see. And if you like what you see there and you like that kind of training, then head over to go.itpro.tv/Technado. You're going to find a special offer for 7 days free trial and 30% off your subscription to IT Pro TV. Also, we've got some information there for businesses that might want to check out some of the special things we have for teams to get you all set up for IT Pro TV as well. That's go.itpro.tv/Technado. All right, gentlemen. Well, another good one today. Another. You were first in bingo last time.
Yeah,
right?
I got bingo real early.
Yeah, and I get it second, and then Don's
Apparently I need to practice my bingo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the
better
problem
words.
is you're explaining all the stories. So you're saying all the words, and we're just over here checking things out.
It was funny. I actually thought, I was like, Don's at a real disadvantage here. And actually, to some extent, you're at a disadvantage when you're doing the news because you have to say the titles.
I have to say the headlines.
Yeah.
and you get
So
them
I'm
right
just
there.
like, yeah, here we go.
Yeah, I'm like, then why has he put all these VR and AI stories in the
So for those of you in TV land, we do have the rule that if one of us says the word, we're not allowed to count it on our own card. So yeah.
you can still count it at home.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
Unless you said it.
Before we did. Yeah, you can't just scream out words at home. Yeah, B3, bingo. Look at me.
That's a weird.
Not
We
how
all
this
heard
works.
it.
Yep.
Not how this works. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you right back here next week on Technado. Thanks so much.